She didn't say anything. The words that would have communicated permission never arrived. No verbal confirmation that you could proceed, no explicit statement about how she felt. But when your hand moved to that particular place, and she didn't stiffen, didn't create distance, didn't manufacture reason to step away, something had been communicated. Something had been revealed. The revelation wasn't in what she said. It was in what her body permitted without resistance. Most men miss this entirely. They're listening for words while the conversation is happening in a language that doesn't use them. They're waiting for verbal confirmation while the body has already voted. They're uncertain about where they stand because they're looking at the wrong evidence. The explicit statements that often lag behind the implicit signals by hours or days, or sometimes never catch up at all. The body speaks before the mind decides to speak. The body reveals what the conscious mind might not yet recognize or might choose to conceal. The woman who says she's not sure about you while leaning toward you has already told you something. The woman who claims interest while positioning her body for exit has also told you something. The verbal and the physical sometimes align. When they conflict, the physical usually tells the truer story. Today we're examining the physical signal that reveals more than most. The particular form of touch that, when permitted, indicates trust has crossed a threshold that changes everything. Not because the touch itself is magical, because her acceptance of it reveals something about how her system has categorized you. The categorization matters more than the touch. The touch is merely the evidence that the categorization has occurred. The body functions as a map of trust that most men have never learned to read. Different regions represent different levels of permission. Different areas correspond to different depths of comfort. The progression through these regions follows logic that operates beneath conscious awareness. Her logic, and often his logic too. Neither party usually articulates what's happening. Both usually understand it anyway. Understanding this map changes how you navigate interaction. The man who understands can read where he stands without needing to ask, can recognize permission when it's being offered, can notice resistance before it becomes rejection. The information is available constantly. Most men simply aren't extracting it. Touch transmits more than physical sensation. The contact between two people carries emotional content that registers beneath conscious processing. She feels what's behind your touch. The confidence or the nervousness, the calm or the tension, the genuine connection or the calculated technique. The physical mechanism is contact. The actual communication is everything the contact carries. Women tend to be particularly attuned to this transmission. The evolutionary pressures that shaped female psychology prioritize sensitivity to signals that indicate safety or danger, genuine interest or manipulation. The sensitivity operates automatically. She's reading what your touch communicates whether she's trying to or not. This is why the same touch from different men produces different responses. The mechanics are identical. What's transmitted through the mechanics differs entirely. The touch that carries confidence creates one response. The touch that carries need creates another. The touch that carries presence creates something different from the touch that carries agenda. The first region of the map involves areas that carry minimal personal significance: the arm, the shoulder, the upper back. Social touch happens here constantly. The greeting, the emphasis during conversation, the casual contact that means almost nothing about relationship status. Contact in these areas establishes basic comfort with physical presence. She's willing to be touched at all. She doesn't recoil from contact with you generally. The information is useful but limited. Neutral touch from a man she actively dislikes would still produce resistance. The absence of resistance here suggests absence of active dislike but doesn't necessarily indicate attraction. Many men overinterpret this stage. She touched my arm during conversation. She must be interested. She didn't pull away when I touched her shoulder. She must want me. The conclusions exceed what the evidence supports. These touches establish that you exist in the category of people whose casual contact is acceptable. The category is large. Most acquaintances fall into it. The absence of response in neutral zones means something. The presence of response doesn't mean what men often assume. The touch that lands in acceptable social territory and receives no particular reaction is simply confirmation that you haven't disqualified yourself from basic social interaction. Not nothing. Not what you're hoping for either. The second region moves closer to personal space while remaining relatively safe. The hands, the wrists, the lower arm. Contact here becomes more deliberate. less easily mistaken for casual. The man who touches a woman's hand knows he's touching her hand. The gesture can't be dismissed as incidental. When she permits extended contact here, the permission signifies something. Hands are personal. The holding of hands communicates connection that shoulder touch doesn't communicate. The lingering touch on the wrist establishes intimacy that arm touch doesn't establish. The region represents movement into territory that matters. Observe what happens in her when contact reaches this level. Does she accept it but remain still? Tolerance without encouragement. Does she reciprocate, her hand responding to yours? Does she lean slightly into the contact, her body amplifying what the touch initiated? The responses differ. The differences contain information. The woman who accepts hand contact while remaining neutral hasn't rejected you but hasn't confirmed interest either. The woman who reciprocates, whose fingers respond, whose hand engages, has participated in establishing connection. The woman whose whole body responds to hand contact has revealed that the touch affected her in ways that extend beyond the contact point. The third region involves areas closer to the body center where instinct becomes more protective. The waist, the lower back, the hip. Contact here requires proximity that earlier stages didn't require. You're close to her now. The touch happens in space that strangers don't occupy. These areas trigger different responses because they're closer to vulnerability. The lower back places your hand near her center of gravity. The waist positions you adjacent to her body's core. The hip approaches territory that's definitively personal. Permission here means something that permission at the shoulder didn't mean. When she accepts contact in this region, when your hand at her lower back produces relaxation rather than tension, a threshold has been crossed. The acceptance indicates that her system has categorized you as safe enough to occupy space that triggers protective instinct. The categorization isn't conscious. It happens beneath awareness, but it determines what she permits. Watch for the subtle indicators, the slight lean into your hand at her back, the absence of the small stiffening that would indicate discomfort, the continuation of conversation without the distraction that uncomfortable touch creates. These suggest that the touch registers as welcome rather than intrusive. Some men push past resistance at this stage, believing that persistence will convert discomfort to acceptance. The belief is wrong and counterproductive. Resistance indicates that categorization hasn't occurred, that her system hasn't yet placed you in the category that permits this proximity. Pushing past the resistance confirms that you're someone who disregards what her system is communicating. The confirmation makes her less safe with you, not more. The fourth region approaches the most sensitive areas. Regions so personal that permission indicates trust that's substantial and specific. The neck, the face, the areas where touch is intimate by nature regardless of intention. Contact here cannot pretend to be casual. Contact here communicates and requires acknowledgement of what it communicates. The neck occupies strange position in physical vulnerability hierarchy. Instinct protects the throat. The area is both physiologically vulnerable and symbolically significant. When she permits touch at her neck, she's permitting what instinct suggests she should guard. The permission indicates that you've overridden what her system would otherwise protect. The face represents identity and physical form. Her face is how she presents herself to the world, the features that make her recognizable, that she sees in mirrors that constitute her physical presence. These live in the face. Touching it approaches territory that's simultaneously intimate and symbolic. Observe the quality of permission here. The woman who accepts face touch with openness has revealed something substantial. The brush of hair from her face, the hand that briefly rests against her cheek, the touch that claims this territory briefly, if received without resistance. These indicate that protection has been lowered for you specifically. The final region involves something beyond typical physical territory, a symbolic gesture that concentrates multiple meanings. When a woman permits a man to touch her hair, to run fingers through it, to arrange it, to interact with it in ways that suggest both intimacy and possession, something significant has been communicated. Hair functions peculiarly in female identity. The care she puts into it, the decisions she makes about it, the way it expresses who she is or who she's trying to become, these make hair more than physical feature. Hair is identity made visible. The man who touches her hair touches something she's cultivated, chosen, invested in. The permission to interact with her hair indicates trust that's specifically about letting someone into something personal. The touch says, "You can access this thing that I've made part of who I am." The absence of resistance says, "I'm comfortable with you inside this space that I normally maintain on my own terms." But here's what matters more than any of this. Her reaction matters more than the touch itself. The touch is input. The reaction is information. The touch might happen for many reasons. You initiated, circumstances placed you in proximity, the context permitted what other contexts wouldn't. The reaction reveals what the touch actually meant to her. The reaction happens in her body before it happens in her words. The slight lean toward you. Milliseconds of movement that indicate draw rather than withdrawal. The relaxation of muscle tension. The softening that indicates comfort rather than vigilance. The eye contact that shifts, meeting yours with something behind it rather than glancing away. These are involuntary. These reveal. Conscious control over these reactions is limited. She can't decide to lean when her instinct is to withdraw. She can't manufacture the softening when her system is producing tension. The reactions emerge from evaluation that happens faster than conscious thought. They're more reliable than her words because they're harder to construct deliberately. Some men learn to watch for these signals and immediately begin trying to produce them through technique. The approach misunderstands what's happening. The signals indicate her genuine response to you. You can't manufacture genuine response through manufactured touch. You can only manufacture her awareness that you're trying to manufacture response, which produces different response than you wanted. Authenticity produces what technique can't produce. The touch that emerges from genuine presence lands differently than the touch that emerges from calculated attempt. She feels the difference. The feeling is immediate and often definitive. The man who's actually connected touches from connection. The man who's performing connection touches from performance. She knows which one she's experiencing. This is why technique obsession leads men astray. The man studying where to touch, and when to touch, and how to touch has missed that the where and when and how matter less than the who. Who is he when he touches? What's he carrying? What comes through the contact? These determine her response more than the mechanics of the contact itself. Attraction develops through progression that can't be rushed without consequence. The man who touches at level 4 when he hasn't established level 2 produces discomfort. The man who reaches for hair when hand contact hasn't been welcomed produces recoil. The attempt to skip stages violates logic that operates whether or not it's consciously understood. The stages exist because trust builds incrementally. Each level of permission requires the previous levels to have been established. Each increase in physical intimacy requires preceding intimacy to have been accepted and processed. The jumping ahead tells her that you don't understand or don't care about the progression her system requires. The progression has pace that varies between individuals and contexts. Some women progress quickly. Stages that take dates for others take hours for them. Some women progress slowly. Extensive time at each stage before next becomes available. Neither pace indicates more or less interest necessarily. Pace indicates how her particular system processes intimacy development. Reading pace correctly prevents both premature escalation and unnecessary delay. The man who recognizes rapid progression doesn't hold himself at stages she's ready to move beyond. The man who recognizes slow progression doesn't push stages she's not yet comfortable with. The reading serves both parties by calibrating approach to actual receptivity. Physical contact functions as conversation happening alongside verbal conversation. The verbal might discuss topics unrelated to attraction. The physical is always discussing attraction. The verbal might reveal what she thinks she should communicate. The physical reveals what's actually happening in her system. When the two conversations align, when verbal and physical both indicate interest, clarity exists. When they conflict, when words say one thing and body says another, the physical usually tells the truer story. She might say she's not interested while her body does everything that interest produces. She might say she's interested while her body communicates the opposite. The body is harder to lie with. Learning to track both conversations simultaneously requires attention that most men don't develop. They focus on verbal, because verbal is easier to process consciously. The physical conversation happens in peripheral awareness, often unregistered or misregistered. The development of tracking skill involves shifting attention to include what the body is saying. The skill isn't about ignoring her words, it's about reading complete communication rather than partial. Her words matter. Her body also matters. The man who reads both understands more than the man who reads only one. None of this exists in vacuum. The context shapes what touch means and what permission indicates. The touch that's significant at business conference means something different at late-night gathering. The permission that's meaningful when alone together means something different in crowded public space. Context calibrates interpretation. The mistake of context blindness, applying the same interpretation framework regardless of circumstance, leads to both missed signals and misread ones. The signal that would be significant in intimate context might be meaningless in social context. The permission that would indicate interest one-on-one might just indicate social comfort in group setting. Cultural context matters too. Different cultures organize physical interaction differently. What constitutes intimate touch in one context might be standard greeting in another. The framework we've discussed describes general patterns, but specific expression varies with the culture surrounding the interaction. Even within cultures, individual variation is substantial. Some women are comfortable with touch generally. Their threshold for discomfort is high. They're physical by nature. Others are more guarded. Their space is smaller, their comfort harder to earn. The same touch that means little from one woman might mean significant things from another. The individual matters as much as the general pattern. This is why observation of the specific person is more important than application of general rules. General rules provide framework. Specific observation tells you what's actually happening with her specifically. The man who applies general rules without specific observation makes errors that specific observation would have prevented. The woman in front of you is not composite of all women you've encountered. She's herself, her particular history, her particular comfort level, her particular way of processing physical interaction. These make her unique even within general patterns. The attention that matters is attention to her, not attention to what women in general supposedly do. Building genuine trust involves more than navigating touch correctly. The touch signals that trust exists. The trust itself gets built through accumulated demonstration of character that deserves trust. The behavior that's consistent, the word that matches action, the reliability that she can verify through observation over time. The touch that she permits with you reflects what she's concluded about who you are. The conclusion formed through everything that preceded the touch. The permission is outcome, not cause. You can't skip to the permission without having created the conditions that make the permission appropriate. The man who focuses entirely on physical escalation misses that the escalation is surface expression of something deeper. The deeper thing is whether you're someone she can trust, whether proximity to you feels safe, whether her system concludes that she can lower the protection that she maintains around others. Some men create artificial conditions that approximate trust without actually building it. The environmental manipulation that reduces her defenses, the alcohol that lowers her capacity to assess, the pressure that overcomes her hesitation through persistence rather than genuine comfort. These produce compliance that isn't permission. They produce outcomes that aren't the outcome she would choose if conditions weren't constructed. The distinction between genuine permission and manufactured compliance matters even if outcomes look similar. The woman who genuinely permitted something feels differently about it afterward than the woman whose permission was manufactured. The man who cares about more than outcomes alone cares about this difference. Respect and safety form the foundation that everything else is built on. The physical intimacy that develops from genuine trust in the presence of genuine respect produces experiences that manufactured situations can't produce. The connection is real. The intimacy is real. What both parties feel is real. The man who understands this approaches physical interaction differently, not as territory to be conquered, not as stages to be moved through as quickly as possible, as communication to be read and participated in honestly, as opportunity to demonstrate the character that deserves the trust she's considering extending. Her body tells you where you stand if you're paying attention. The information is available constantly. The permission or resistance exists in her responses, the subtle movements toward or away, the tension or relaxation, the openness or guardedness that physical interaction reveals. The man who reads accurately doesn't ask unnecessary questions because the body has already answered. He doesn't push where resistance exists because he felt the resistance. He doesn't fail to proceed where permission exists because he recognized the permission. The reading creates calibrated response that respects what's being communicated. The particular touch we've been building toward. The touch that when permitted indicates trust has crossed a significant threshold. exists at the intersection of intimacy and identity, the hair touch. The gesture that combines physical intimacy with symbolic access to something she's made personally meaningful. When she permits this touch with the response that indicates genuine welcome, when her system accepts rather than tolerates, when she leans into rather than merely permits, a threshold has been crossed. The permission indicates that you've been placed in a category that others don't occupy, that she feels safe with you in ways she doesn't feel with others, that whatever you've built through your behaviour has been sufficient for her system to allow what it would otherwise protect. The permission isn't endpoint, it's marker. The marker indicates something about where you stand, but standing there doesn't mean the work is complete. The trust that she extended can be violated. The category you entered can be exited through behaviour that contradicts what got you there. The ongoing work involves maintaining what you demonstrated in the building. The consistency that built trust continues building trust. The character that deserved access continues deserving access. The relationship that develops from this foundation requires continued expression of what the foundation was made from. Some men reach the threshold and immediately change their behaviour. The chase is over. The goal is achieved. The treatment shifts. The woman notices. The categorization that she made becomes suspect. The trust that she extended might retract. The permission doesn't persist automatically. It persists because the conditions that produced it persist. The woman who permitted significant intimacy remains evaluating. The evaluation is less active than during initial assessment, but still ongoing. The conclusion she reached can be reconsidered. The category can be revised. The trust can erode through failure to maintain what built it. Understanding this produces different orientation than closing the deal thinking. The deal isn't closed. The deal remains ongoing. Each interaction contributes to her continuing conclusion about who you are and whether you deserve the access she's permitted. The physical connection that develops from this foundation becomes something different than physical connection that's acquired without it. The intimacy carries the trust that preceded it. The touch is enriched by everything. The touch signals about what's been built between you. She feels this difference even if she can't articulate it. The man she trusts touches differently than the man she doesn't. The physical connection with someone who earned access feels different than physical connection with someone who acquired it through other means. The feeling matters. It affects everything that follows. The touch that crossed the threshold of trust becomes reference point for everything that comes after. The memory of how it felt when she realized she could let you in. The confirmation that her assessment was correct. That you deserved the access she gave, that the trust she extended was warranted. Building toward this threshold and crossing it correctly creates foundation for everything that could develop. The foundation is trust. The expression of trust was physical, but the physical was expression, not the thing itself. The thing itself is the conclusion she reached about who you are and whether you're safe enough to matter. The man who understands this doesn't obsess over technique for crossing the threshold. He focuses on being someone who deserves to cross it. The being produces the crossing more reliably than the technique. The crossing that results from genuine being produces better outcomes than the crossing that results from manufactured approach. Her permission indicates what you've built. The building happens before the permission. The permission confirms what was built. The sequence doesn't reverse. You can't get the permission and then build what would have deserved it. The building comes first, or the permission doesn't come genuinely. The touch she permits tells you where you stand. The information is valuable because it's accurate. The accuracy comes from the fact that her body doesn't lie the way words can lie. She can't permit what her system hasn't permitted. She can't relax into touch that her system finds threatening. The permission, when genuine, indicates something genuine about how she's categorized you. Read what she's telling you through what she permits. The information is clearer than anything she could say because it emerges from a system that doesn't construct information deliberately. The reading serves you both because it produces responses that match where you actually stand rather than where either of you might pretend to stand. The threshold of trust, once crossed, indicates that connection has moved past initial uncertainty into territory where something can be built. The territory isn't guaranteed to produce anything. But the possibility of production now exists in ways it didn't exist before. The permission is beginning, not conclusion. What you build in this territory and what develops after the threshold is crossed depends on continued expression of what allowed you to cross it. The trust that permitted access deserves to continue being earned. The character that she concluded deserved closeness deserves continued demonstration. The relationship that emerges has foundation that other relationships lack. The physical was preceded by psychological. The intimacy was built on genuine trust rather than manufactured conditions. What she feels with you connects to conclusions she reached about who you are. This is why the patient building produces different outcomes than the rushed pushing. The patient builder creates foundation. The rush producer creates outcomes without foundation. The outcomes might look similar temporarily. What they're built on differs entirely. The difference appears when anything tests what was built. The physical intimacy that arrives after trust has been established survives. Challenge is that physical intimacy without foundation doesn't survive. When problems appear, and problems always appear, the trust that preceded the physical provides resilience that the physical alone couldn't provide. She permits the touch that indicates trust has crossed the threshold. The permission reveals what she's concluded about you. The conclusion matters more than the permission. The conclusion shapes everything that follows in ways the permission alone couldn't determine. Understand what you're actually working toward, not the touch itself, the trust that the touch indicates. Build what produces genuine trust rather than manipulating conditions that produce compliance without trust. The building produces better outcomes. The manipulation produces outcomes that don't last. The line of trust, once crossed, changes what's possible between you. The crossing happens because of what you built. The building is the work. The crossing is the evidence that the work succeeded. For those who've experienced this, the moment when her permission revealed that trust had crossed the threshold, share what preceded it. What did you build that allowed the crossing? The observations help others understand what actually produces what technique pretends to produce. If she allows this touch, you've already crossed something. The crossing tells you where you stand. What you do with the standing determines what happens next.